The morning sun poured through the tall pine trees as Ethan Parker stepped out of his old pickup truck. The forest smelled of pine and earth, the same smell that had comforted him as a child. To him, this wasn't just land. It was a memory, a promise, and now, thanks to his late father's savings, it was his property. Every acre, every tree, but not everyone saw it that way. By noon, a well-dressed woman stormed into the clearing, her heels sinking into the dirt with every step. She had the confidence of someone used to getting her way and the arrogance to match. "You there!" she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the forest. "This area is part of the HOA. You can't just park here. Where's your permit?" Ethan blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? I own this land," he said, his voice calm but firm. She laughed, a short, mocking sound. "Don't be ridiculous. This forest belongs to the community. You're trespassing." And just like that, Ethan realized this wasn't going to be a quiet return to his roots. This woman, this Karen, had no idea the land no longer belonged to the HOA. And he wasn't about to let her bully him into believing otherwise. Ethan tried to keep his tone steady as he reached into his backpack, pulling out the property deed. "Look," he said, holding the paper out. "I just bought this land from the county auction. It's mine now, legally." Karen didn't even glance at the document. Instead, she crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. "Do you think a piece of paper scares me? This forest has been part of our HOA for years. You don't just get to waltz in and claim it." Behind her, two neighbors lingered, whispering to each other. Ethan could feel their judgmental stares, but he wasn't going to back down. This land had been in his family generations ago. He'd fought hard to buy it back. "I'm not looking for trouble," Ethan said, his voice firm but controlled. "I just want to rebuild my father's old cabin and take care of this place." "That's all," Karen smirked, tilting her head in false pity. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. Around here, we make the rules. And if you think you're building anything without our approval, you're in for a rude awakening." As she turned and marched off, Ethan stared at the trees around him. Trouble had arrived faster than he'd expected. But deep down, he knew. This fight wasn't about to scare him off. Not from the land his family had loved for decades. By the next morning, the letters started arriving. Brightly colored envelopes plastered with the HOA's logo, each one full of warnings, fines, and mandatory compliance forms. "You are hereby notified," one letter read, "that unauthorized activity within HOA-managed zones is prohibited. Failure to vacate the premises within 10 days will result in legal action." Ethan laughed bitterly as he crumpled the letter in his hands. "Legal action? For living on my own land?" He drove into town, met with the county clerk, and triple-checked the paperwork. The deed was legitimate, filed, and indisputable. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was control. That evening, as the forest turned gold with the setting sun, Ethan sat on a fallen log and thought about his father. The man who'd taught him how to fish in the river nearby. The man who'd told him, "Son, this land takes care of those who take care of it." And for the first time in years, Ethan felt that same determination burning in his chest. He wasn't going anywhere. No matter how many letters they sent, no matter how many threats they made, this land was his now. And he'd fight for it. 2 weeks later, Karen returned, this time with two men in suits and a clipboard full of documents. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You have exactly 3 days to vacate," she snapped. "The HOA has voted." "You're in violation of multiple codes." Ethan stood his ground, arms crossed. "Violation of what? Owning my own property?" One of the men in suits cleared his throat. "Technically, the HOA guidelines state that technically," Ethan interrupted, pulling a copy of his deed from his pocket. "I'm the only one with legal ownership of this forest. The county sold it to me. It's no longer part of your jurisdiction." Karen's face flushed red. "This is our community. You can't just—" "I can," Ethan said sharply. "And I will. I'm building my cabin here. You don't get To bully me out of my own home? For a moment, there was silence. The birds in the trees seemed to pause, as though waiting to see what would happen next. Then, with a huff, Karen turned on her heel, muttering something under her breath as she stormed back toward her car. Ethan exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. The battle was far from over, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the scared newcomer anymore. This was his land, his rules. With every nail hammered and every beam set in place, the old cabin began to take shape again. Ethan worked long hours, his hands blistered but steady, his mind focused on the future. Neighbors would stop by, some curious, some supportive, but most just quiet observers. A few even whispered apologies for Karen's behavior, admitting they'd been tired of her power games for years. By the third week, the cabin had walls, a roof, and even a porch overlooking the lake. In the evenings, Ethan would sit there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a cup of coffee in his hand, and a quiet smile on his face. But even in those peaceful moments, he knew Karen was planning her next move. He'd hear rumors in town, about petitions, about community votes, about finding loopholes to drive him out. Instead of fear, though, Ethan felt something else: strength. For years, he'd been the man who stayed quiet, who avoided conflict. But now, with the land under his feet and his father's memory in his heart, he was ready for whatever came next. It happened on a warm Saturday morning. A group of HOA members, led by Karen, marched down the dirt path and stopped right in front of Ethan's new cabin. "This is your final warning," Karen said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "Either you sign these papers and join the HOA, or we'll have no choice but to escalate this legally." Ethan stepped out onto the porch, calm but firm. "I told you before," he said, "I am not, and will never be, a member of your HOA. This land is mine, and you have no power here." Karen's lips tightened, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You'll regret this," she hissed, before turning sharply and storming away, her group trailing behind like shadows. The moment they were gone, Ethan walked back inside, grabbed his phone, and made a call. By evening, his lawyer had filed a cease and desist notice against the HOA for harassment. The fight was no longer just personal, it was legal, and for the first time, Ethan felt the tide turning in his favor. Part 7. Victory and Peace Weeks. Later, the letter arrived, official, stamped, and final. The court had ruled in Ethan's favor. The HOA had no claim, no control, no authority over his forest. When Karen came by again, it wasn't with threats or demands. It was with a cold, forced smile and a muttered congratulations before she disappeared for good. Ethan didn't celebrate with noise or anger. Instead, he spent that evening on his porch, the cool breeze rustling through the trees, a quiet peace settling in his heart. This was more than just land. It was freedom. It was a promise fulfilled. As the sun set behind the pines, painting the sky in gold and orange, Ethan whispered softly, almost to himself, "We're home, Dad. Finally, we're home." And in that moment, surrounded by the forest that had always been his, Ethan Parker knew one thing: no one could take this away from him ever again.